Welcome back after the break. You're watching Indus News and I'm Fiza Jamal with our latest stories in detail. Pakistan is observing its annual Defense and Martyrs Day to pay tribute to the heroes of 1965 and 1971 wars with India. To highlight the plight of Kashmiris living under Indian occupation, the event is also being observed as Kashmir Solidarity Day. In a message, President Arif Alvi said Pakistan is capable of defeating internal and external threats. Prime Minister Imran Khan said Pakistan is united against India's oppression in occupied Kashmir. He said India's illegal revocation of the disputed state special status poses challenges to Pakistan's security and integrity. Addressing the ceremony, Army Chief Qamar Javed Bajwa said Pakistan will never leave Kashmiris alone. He also said it is the responsibility of the whole world to counter Indian oppression on Kashmiris. He added Kashmiris have been subjected to prejudice, racism and hatred. And the U.S. has reiterated concerns over the deteriorating situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir. State Department spokesperson Morgan Ortagus said the U.S. continues to be worried by widespread detentions in the valley. In remarks to Indian media, Ortagus called for the lifting of month-long restrictions on the residents of occupied Kashmir. She said Washington is deeply worried over the communications blackout in the region. Ortagus said U.S. wants India to resume political engagement in the disputed state. Meanwhile, New Delhi has charged Kashmiri activist Shehla Rashid with sedition for her online criticism of Indian rights violations. Rashid has reported that the Indian Army is indiscriminately detaining men, raiding houses and torturing people in occupied Kashmir. Now in Afghanistan, the Taliban have launched an assault on the western city of Farah. Provincial authorities say Afghan security forces are fighting insurgents in the city's outskirts. Police spokesman Mohibullah Mohib says Taliban fighters have been pushed back after attacking Farah from 3 sides. He claimed 30 insurgents have been killed in air raids. Although the Afghan media says the Taliban still controls several government offices. Farah is the 3rd Afghan provincial headquarters to be attacked by the Taliban in a week after Kunduz and Baghlan. The surge in fighting follows an agreement in principle on a peace deal between the U.S. and the Taliban. And after briefing the Afghan government on the progress of talks, U.S. envoy Zalmay Khalilzad has flown back to Washington for consultations. France and the UK have criticized Iran's plans to further reduce compliance with the 2015 nuclear deal. Iran says it will end its limits on the development of uranium centrifuges after the US refused a sanctions waiver. Britain says it is deeply concerned by Iran's suspension of limits on nuclear research and development. In a Foreign Office statement, Britain said international partners to the deal are working hard to reduce tensions with Iran. France called on Tehran to avoid steps that might jeopardize European efforts to reduce conflict with the US. French Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Agnes Vandermeul said the development will now be discussed with the International Atomic Energy Agency. Iran detailed its plans for uranium enrichment in a letter to the EU's foreign policy chief, Federica Mogherini. Saudi Arabia has issued a stern warning to Yemeni separatists who have seized key parts of Aden and other southern governorates. Riyadh says any attempt to destabilize Yemen is a threat to its security and stability that will be firmly dealt with. Renewing calls for dialogue, Riyadh called on separatists to return captured military and civilian facilities. In a statement issued through the Saudi press agency, it rejected any alternative to the government of President Mansour Hadi. Meanwhile, thousands of Yemenis marched in Aden in support of the UAE that supports the separatists. Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson says the only way to unite the country is through Brexit. Speaking in Northern England, Johnson ruled out asking for a further delay in Brexit from the EU. He said Parliament has reduced his power to negotiate a better exit deal. The Prime Minister says staying in the EU will not be a good use of public money. Johnson wants to hold elections on October the 15th, but failed to win support from lawmakers on Wednesday. The House of Commons leader, Jacob Rees-Mogg, said Parliament will vote on early elections again on Monday. Rees-Mogg also said the Brexit delay bill will be given royal assent once it passes through the House of Lords. He said all legislation needed to leave the European Union October the 31st is in place. U.S. Vice President Mike Pence says Washington supports Britain's planned departure from the European Union. He made the statement after meeting UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson at 10 Downing Street in London. Pence says the U.S. is willing and able to immediately negotiate a free trade agreement with the UK. He says the deal could quadruple trade between the two countries.
I'm grateful for your hospitality. I spoke to President Trump this morning, your friend, and he asked me to send you his very best greetings and to assure you that the United States supports the United Kingdom's decision to leave the European Union, but he also wanted me to convey that the United States is ready, willing, and able to immediately negotiate a free trade agreement with the UK.
And Johnson told Pence the UK's National Health Service would not be negotiated in US trade talks once Britain has left the European Union. Moving on, German Chancellor Angela Merkel says the trade dispute between China and the US is affecting the whole world. She has expressed hopes the dispute between the world's two largest economies can be resolved sooner rather than later. Merkel made the comments during talks with Chinese Premier Li Keqiang in Beijing. At the meeting, Li said China hopes Germany will accept more Chinese companies and loosen export rules. Prior to their discussions, the leaders attended a welcoming ceremony for the Chancellor. During her two-day visit, Merkel is expected to push for a European investment deal with China. Merkel will use the trip to persuade Beijing to open up its markets and embrace fairer competition. Sudan's Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok has formed the first government since the overthrow of longtime ruler Omar al-Bashir in April. The government was formed as part of a 3-year power-sharing deal between the military and civilian parties last month. The announcement was delayed for days by deliberations over opposition nominees for cabinet posts. Prime Minister Hamdok announced the names of 18 ministers in his new cabinet. He said 2 other ministers will be included later. Zimbabwe's former president Robert Mugabe has died in Singapore at the age of 95. President Emerson Mnangagwa announced his death on Twitter but gave no details. Watch this report on how he tightened his grip on power.
Robert Mugabe once quipped he'd rule Zimbabwe until he turned 100. He very nearly achieved this goal. Mugabe first came to power in 1980, a hero in the fight against white minority rule, and a legend even in the West. In office, he was credited with education reforms and forcing reconciliation between blacks and whites. But even then, Mugabe's reputation for repression had begun.
For the first few years, I think you have to say that Mugabe was a very wise leader. There were some major catastrophes, particularly by the use of too much force to put down what he thought was a rebellion in the west side of the country. But really, for the first 10, perhaps even 15 years, Mugabe led the country very, very well.
Mugabe's efforts at reconciliation faded quickly, epitomized by the seizure of white-owned farms. Introduced in 2000, this radical policy was used to reward his own supporters, few of whom knew much about farming. The result was famine in a country once known as the breadbasket of Africa. Yet Mugabe would go on to win elections several times, ignoring each international outcry that followed the widespread use of violence to intimidate his opponents. As he entered his 90s, he lost none of his disdain for political enemies.
We will fight the white man. We will fight until the last of us falls naked with nothing.
Mugabe continued to enjoy popularity with his party and to win elections. Though in 2008, polls were marked by violence against the opposition, and the 2012 vote was likely rigged. Having become the world's oldest president, he was finally forced to relinquish power on the 21st of November 2017, dropped by his party, the army, and the people. When he died, after 37 years of undivided rule, Zimbabwe still had not recovered from the economic collapse that ravaged the country.
The Bahamas says the number of people killed by Hurricane Durian has climbed to 30. Officials in Nassau say the final death toll is expected to be much higher. Since leaving the Bahamas, the slow-moving storm has regained strength off the eastern U.S. seaboard. Durian is currently buffeting the Carolinas, where coastal towns have been flooded. The hurricane has also whipped up tornadoes and cut power to hundreds of thousands of people. Floodwaters have risen to a foot or more in low-lying parts of historic Charleston City. The eye of the hurricane is projected to skirt the eastern U.S. coast as it edges northward. Life-threatening storm surges and dangerous winds remain a threat to North Carolina and Virginia. More from bad weather. Japan's east coast is still recovering from the effects of the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami. This includes the small town of Kaimashi, which was almost destroyed. Now the town is hosting 2 matches at this month's Rugby World Cup. This report has all the details.
Kaimashi is much better protected against tsunamis than it was in 2011. Today, the town has a seawall to give it a measure of protection from similar disasters. This is still too late for the people of the town. More than 1,100 were left dead or unaccounted for after the tsunami struck. The wave also left the local fishing industry in tatters.
Following the disaster, it was difficult for a lot of the children to talk about their experience. A lot of them lost their parents or family members, so as teachers we were very conscious and did not want to touch upon any sensitive aspects or try to force them to go through difficult memories. We did other sorts of things like having the children write out their own stories.
But Kaimashi managed to get back on its feet. Locals say if they can host the Rugby World Cup, they can show the world their resilience.
It is a real sense of hope for us to have a place where these 2 schools once stood, to have a place where everyone can band together.
Some people see the World Cup as an opportunity to make some money. Others say they would be happy to see some tourists in their town when the 2019 Rugby World Cup kicks off on September 20th.
Well, now I'll take a very short break. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back after the break. You're watching Indus News and I'm Fiza Jamal with our latest stories in detail. Well, the UAE's astronaut Hazza Al-Mansouri says he is proud to be the first Emirati into space. Al-Mansouri is expected to blast off from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan on September the 25th. He will be accompanied by other members of the 61-62 ISS mission. Al-Mansouri says he wants to capture every minute of the experience to later share with his compatriots. ISS mission commander Oleg Skripochka has praised Al-Mansouri's professionalism and level of knowledge.
Along the way, we will learn how we can adapt as a humankind on board the station in microgravity, and how can we live in this harsh environment. And all of this will give us a benefit, how to go beyond low Earth orbit and to go to the moon and beyond that in future.
Al-Mansouri says he trusts his team in space and on the ground, who give him a manageable workload with a number of scientific experiments. And now, Joni Mitchell sang about paving paradise for a parking lot, and a Swiss artist has set up a forest in a football stadium. This suggests that one day nature might only be enjoyed in a zoo-like environment. Find the details here.
An artificial forest setup of around 300 trees in Klagenfurt Stadium in southern Austria is part of a climate change campaign. During the past century, human activities have released large amounts of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. The tree exhibition will be held to encourage more tree planting and highlight the risks posed by global warming.
For some, this will be of a highly symbolic character or of a philosophical character, like the tree of life or the place of longing. Because of the current situation, this represents a memorial as a part of the climate change discussion.
While climate change has recently become a pressing political issue in much of the world, the idea for the exhibition is not new. It was first drawn by Austrian artist Max Pentner almost 30 years ago, and the image is shown in the stadium.
It goes back to the drawing which we project here by Max Pentner, who in 1970 had the vision that one day that what we have been doing for decades at zoos with endangered animals could happen to nature.
That man also said, if everybody can take a stand and try to end global warming, this world would be a safer place to live in. The exhibition will run till October 27th and it opens on Monday, 8th of September.
Well, let's hope that sends a strong message. Now, in some cute stories, crowds in a Chinese eatery ignore their drinks to gather adoringly around 4 fluffy white ducks. The cafe is the brainchild of several recent graduates who introduced call ducks to attract young customers to their business. Find out what that means in this report.
Phones poised ready for pictures, customers hug ducks while enjoying hot coffee at a popular animal cafe. The eatery in the southwestern city of Chengdu, Here We Go, provides a perfect fodder for the social media savvy generation. Patrons can spend up to 90 minutes with the ducks who waddle around from table to table to the delights of customers.
They're really fun and very obedient, not like those swimming ducks which aren't. These can be very obedient.
Cafe co-founder Lu Xiaoqi said he got the idea when he recently raised his own pet duck.
Everyone loves ducks. I started off by raising a duckling all the way to its adulthood. So I thought it could be possible to open a duck cafe. It's the same concept I had with teacup pigs.
Lu said the cafe's star attractions are not for sale. The newest arrivals, 2 miniature teacup pigs who fit neatly inside a pink miniature shopping trolley, are also proving to be a major attraction.
Let's take you to the world of business, where the world's major oil companies have now approved projects worth $50 billion, although they will not be economically viable if governments implement the UN's Paris Agreement on climate change. This information has been released by the climate change think tank Carbon Tracker in their latest report. Find the details here.
The document says new projects have been undertaken by Shell, Canada LNG Project, Exxon, Chevron and Equinor. It says the companies spent at least 30% of their investment last year on projects breaking climate change limits. It suggests companies risk wasting $2.2 trillion by 2030 on new projects if the governments apply stricter curbs. While some companies, including Shell, BP, Total and Equinor, have increased their spending on renewable energy, more investment is required. The report ends by saying if current exploration plans continue, the chances of limiting global warming to 1.6 degrees Celsius are dismal.
Well, now it's time to see what the weather is looking like around the globe today. These are all of the latest stories in detail I have for you this hour. Stay tuned to Indus News for further updates.